And you're back in the Gunners Club here with Gunner and with Dixie. Ben Elton's latest autobiography has just come out with the great title, What Have I Done? And he's travelling now around Australia and New Zealand heavily to push it. I read the book recently. I'm actually quite a big fan. Let me tell you why. Just like yourself, Dixie, I grew up a big fan of Ben Elton's works through the young ones. Of course, migrating across to Blackadder. And I've got to say, as an early uni student, getting the sort of student vibes that he gives off in a lot of his work, I read his first novel, Stark. That was such a success, went on to sell over 1 million copies, be reprinted some 23 times or so. I enjoyed it. I liked his characterisation. I liked the strong environmental leanings of it. I also was surprised of how Australian-centric that book was. It wasn't until later on, including reading his autobiography, that I realised he actually lives a bit of a dual life. That is, circling between both sides of the globe. I guess with a lot of people.
See, he's always done that. He's always borrowed freely, but he's borrowed freely from English culture. He's borrowed freely from the personal life of his wife, which he freely confesses. And at the time when The Young Ones was coming out, he borrowed very freely in the aura and the excitement of the star Rick Mail himself, touring with him to chat shows, etc. So a person who doesn't have an awful lot of charisma, not in buckets, but he seems to have enjoyed the star life by actually touring in very tight association with his stars.
That's an interesting point. I guess there was an early period of his stand-up when he refers to the sparkly suit period, where he did stand up and he really was blooded. He was going on stage all the time. That's how he learnt to have some command over the audience. But he was always, you see, a consummate writer. And he did see himself really as being the person who would write rather than be the person on stage. I remember being so influenced as a university student, turning up and doing a performance, borrowing very heavily a lot of gags that Ben Elton had written, even renting a Beatles wig to try and get my hair dark and approximating the way that his hair looked. But I guess as someone who wears the environment on their sleeve, he's someone who looks back now and says how lucky he was that he wasn't aware of the carbon footprint issue that he was generating by freely crossing the globe between Australia and England. Sounds rather convenient.
There was a time when he played in Ballarat 2-3 years ago.
In Bendigo?
In Bendigo, beg your pardon. And pushed very, very strongly his agenda, which he'd pushed through Upstart Crow, which a lot of his work is really undergraduate humour, English pantomime crossed together.
Yeah.
But he seemed to push the transgenderism to a point where he'd lost me and part of the audience. And when he came up on the stage and gave a very long, languid, luxurious bow and looked back up, expecting adoration from everyone in the crowd in Bendigo, he didn't get it from about a quarter of the audience.
Do you think it was because of the politics that he'd slipped slightly off the track?
I had the feeling that he'd left his own place because of the consequences of leftism and was trying to now say, oh, well, aren't I the generous guy again with my left politics here?
I find that his politics is a little bit tortured and that there's a lot of backtracking and apology that's necessary if you're trying to toe a particular political line. And I think it detracts from the straight-out humour of what he's trying to sell. I remember on stage him saying, pointing to himself and saying, people have accused me of killing Benny Hill. Now, I don't think that he did kill Benny Hill, but I certainly think that he was on the cusp of the change of politics that certainly did end up with him being reconciled to the dustbin. I remember, however, living in Germany, and certainly Benny Hill was getting more than his major play on television still in the 90s.
I remember going to a World Cup, a pub with a plasma screen, and one of the English crowd had a bald head, and every time there was danger of a goal happening, he ran, because everyone was going to give him a Benny Hill pat on the head. He killed Benny Hill in the same way that he killed Blackadder. He just took over and ran with it and said it was his. People didn't forget Benny Hill. Do you really think that Blackadder series 2, 3 and 4 were better than the original Blackadder?
Well, in the autobiography, Ben Elton would argue, yes, most definitely. He would say that the thing about Blackadder was that it was written, the first series, to be shown on a large screen, essentially. So it was done with movie aspirations. He said it was known widely to look like $1 million, but to have cost $2 million. And he'd say, look, if you've got a scene of someone mounting or dismounting a horse, it doesn't matter if it's done from the camera a mile away, or if it's done close up, the same comic effect is there. And he was invited to help out with the writing of series 2, 3 and 4. He wasn't involved in the first one, but his idea was very much to bring that to the established sitcom area that he knows. You have a couple of closed rooms or sets, and you can have some things filmed in front of an audience as well, and that's essentially the way that he writes. I agree with you, Dixie, that there's a very heavy emphasis on pantomime. Now that's a kind of humour that doesn't really translate outside of the Commonwealth. I don't even know if an American would understand. I certainly tried to explain this to a Greek teacher, what pantomime means, even though the word does have the derivation from Greek. The idea of a pantomime horse doesn't exist in the Greek psyche. I don't think it really does in America
It's
either.
more than poetic license. And the gorgeous girls dressed up as a page boy, and the bearded lady is actually a robust man. It doesn't.
Although, curiously enough, that goes directly back to Greek theatre.
That said, though, I've got to be a bit forgiving about Ben Elton. He can actually turn the finger upon himself in a not just in an accusative way, but in a humorous way. He wrote a book which was really based on 1984. 1984 was actually part of a trilogy of political books, where he actually showed what would happen if people's sense of of the right to assert themselves everywhere was taken too far, to the point where women would be riding escalators with their busts spilling out of their clothing, and basically using it to barge their way any way they want, any way they turn it, and say, "You disrespecting my boobie." Well, I thought that was a classic, so I've got to give him as much license as a writer needs. And the other thing is too, a writer has to have permission to write. It's in deciding what to publish is when they actually censor themselves.
Certainly successful. I mean, he's gone on to publish, I think, somewhere in the order of a dozen books. He also prides himself as well, I think, on having a go. It's an interesting autobiography in that it is a warts and all, in that all of the failures have come out. You might remember, for example, he started a Tonight Live show in Perth, which famously went on, I think, for 2 to 3 episodes,
right,
and was cancelled. He's had a number of theatre pieces that didn't do successfully financially, but then he's also had the great hits which have completely blown up. There's been some which he's done and found himself having to step in not only as writer but also as director. For example, We Will Rock You, Queen, which started off by being performing quite poorly, where you'd have the curtains drawn in so that only a fraction of the auditorium was open for paying guests.
Right.
And then as you sell more seats, you remove the curtains and suddenly you've got the full amphitheatre that's there open for sales. So I've got to say, he wears his successes and his failures equally honestly, but when we did see him on stage in Bendigo, he referred to himself as the most successful sitcom writer ever. I don't know if I'd go that far, because you see, I think some of the sitcoms have been a little bit more miss even than hit. I've been catching up with The Thin Blue Line recently. I don't find much in the humour of that. But then, having said that, to his mind, the greatest work he'd ever written was Upstart Crow. Now, recently I caught up with the COVID special that was written for Upstart Crow. In Upstart Crow, that was a reference that actually was made as a criticism by one of William Shakespeare's peers, who was deriding Shakespeare as that upstart crow. Your favourite comedian, Mitchell, plays the part of Shakespeare. And in this episode, they go back to the period of the bubonic plague and they're wearing the plague masks. But openly, it's referring to the COVID situation that we were living under. And they were hoarding the alcohol and they were hoarding the salted meats and they were hoarding the vegetables and trying to find moss even for their backsides, which is sort of similar to the toilet paper shortage that we had in Melbourne. But equally, I've got to say, in terms of him wearing his successes openly and his failures, the petty squabbles that he's had with relationships with other people, even with Rick Mayall, I think are very open and very candid. He talks about when he was writing with Rick Mayall, some of the arguments that he had where Rick Mayall would change the bargain or the arrangement that was had and say, but this is it, there's no need to discuss it, we can't do anything about it, and then it'd have to move on only for the relationship to be renegotiated again. They were halcyon days when Ben Elton was young and Rick Mayall was at the top of his game. Unfortunately for Rick, as he got older, his star started to wane. It was getting more difficult for Ben to write projects with Rick Mayall in mind. I think part of his strength is, though, he's teamed up with very good actors and very good writers. Yep. Some of the collaborations with Stephen Fry, I think, have been masterful. Although there was the piece that he'd written for Rick Mayall and Stephen Fry, where Stephen Fry was absent for mental leave issues, which made the show very hard to continue and ultimately not a success. But also with the people he's found to write with. We talk about Blackadder and talk about Richard Curtis. You were a fan of Blackadder. What were your thoughts of seasons 1 through to 4?
You could tell that Channel 7 Australia was part of Series 1. There was enough money.
The money was there.
The money was certainly there. I mean, was it Series 3 they went to see but didn't go to see? Yeah. I mean, a lot of that was telling. It became high farce. Series 1 I really loved because there was mystery, there were witches, there was war that was really happening. You could feel that war was coming and it was imminent and that there'd be repercussions for the people, whereas it just became high farce seasons 2 to 4, which I love too. There's certainly a place for high farce.
I think with the turn for season 4 and that you did have the drama of death and ultimately the characters dying at the final hurrah in World War One.
I think he's very wise to say there'll be no more Blackadder. That's it. You know.
Although he has said that, but at times he said he'd still be persuaded.
If they actually went through the next season and had Red Adder and set it in the Tsarist Russia, then that would be something that could actually pick up with interest in Russia today. The way to do it is not actually write it yourself. Say it's a spin-off. You have it both ways. The Christmas specials didn't have anything great. Like all comedians, I think he's best when he works on satire rather than preaching. I think you'll lose your audience when you do that.
I think that's the biggest downfall with him. It's that feeling of going away feeling that you've been lectured to. For example, I have recently bought the latest Midnight Oil album, which is very good. But I remember you saying to me that Midnight Oil's got a new album out. And my words to you were, what have I done wrong now? I feel like I'm about to be preached. You always get a healthy dose of that, I think, with Ben Elton on stage, as well as you do, I think, in the TV series as well that he writes. Other people he's partnered with successfully, I think Hugh Laurie was a bit of a golden find as well.
Yeah. My life is richer for Ben Elton being about.
Yes.
And you're saying
I agree with that too. I do agree.
The success of his shows. Normally a showman, a person who brings out shows, can expect 1 in every 4 to actually make their money back. It's really the same as grassroots horse racing. 1 in every 4. No, he's done well over the odds.
Yeah, I think you're right. In terms of the book, look for it. It's on your bookshelves. It came out only 2 weeks ago. I read it in a great hurry because I found it actually really, really interesting. Like I said, to learn more about the petty squabbles, which I never would have imagined would have been on the page, the personal hurts, the times that he was basically alone in the wilderness and unloved, and the many decades it took for him to get basically back into his shiny suit stage.
Yeah.
And get back on the stage and do something which I think is really great. Tell the lines which he's written, because if you watch an English sitcom from the 80s and the 90s which he's written, even Upstart Crow goes back to that, you can tell a line is written by him. He's got a delicious turn of phrase. I think if anything for a criticism apart from the political correctness would be to say he's the sort of chap who will read a couple of classics and then constantly go back to the same well to draw from that.
And that's why I'm really surprised he's basing himself in Australia, because they're not Australian classics that he looks at, not once.
What do you think? Do you have a favourite Ben Elton book? I bet you do. Or a favourite series? Put it in the comments below and join us for more adventures. We'll see you soon.